October 24th, 1899, Volume 2, The Cause of Chastisements, The Love of God for Creatures. This morning my adorable Jesus came and transported me outside of myself into the midst of the people. Jesus seemed to look at creatures with eyes of compassion, and the very chastisements appeared as infinite mercies of his, come out of his inmost loving heart. Then turning to me, he told me, "My daughter, man is a product of the divine being, and since our food is love, always reciprocal, alike and constant among the three divine persons, since he came out of our hands, and from pure and disinterested love, he is like a particle of our food. Now this particle has become bitter for us. Not only this, but the majority of them, by moving away from us, have made themselves pasture for the infernal flames and food for the implacable hatred of demons, our capital enemies and theirs. This is the main cause of our sorrow in the loss of souls. They are ours. They are something that belongs to us. Likewise, the cause that pushes me to chastise them is the great love that I have for them, so as to place their souls in safety. And Lord, it seems at this time you have no other words to say but about chastisements. Your power has other means to save these souls. And then if I were certain that all the pain would fall upon them and you would remain free without suffering in them, I would resign myself. But I see that you are already suffering very much from those chastisements you have sent. What will happen if you continue sending more chastisements? And Jesus, even though I suffer, love pushes me to send heavier scourges, and this because in order to make man enter himself and recognize what his being is, there is no means more powerful than making him see himself undone. It seems that the other means make him grow bolder. Therefore conform to my justice. I see well that the love you have for me pushes you very much not to conform to me, and you don't have the heart to see me suffer. But my mother too loved me more than all creatures. No one can equal her. And yet, in order to save these souls, she conformed to justice, and she resigned herself to see me suffer so much. If my mother did this, could you not do it yourself?" And as Jesus was speaking, I felt my will being drawn so much to his that I was almost unable any more to withstand not conforming to his justice. I did not know what to say, so much was I convinced. However, I have not yet manifested my will. Jesus disappeared, and I remained in this doubt whether I must conform or not. October 24th, 1903, Volume 5, An Image of the Church. As I told the confessor about my concerns that my state may not be will of God, and that, at least as a test, I wanted to try to make an effort to go out of it and see whether I could manage or not, without raising his usual difficulties, the confessor said, "All right, tomorrow you will try." So I was left as if I had been freed of an enormous weight. Now, after he celebrated Holy Mass, and I received communion, I saw my adorable Jesus in my interior for just a little, his gaze fixed on me, his hands joined, in the act of asking for pity and help. At that moment, I found myself outside of myself, inside a room in which there was a lady, majestic and venerable, but gravely infirm. She was inside a bed with a headboard so high as to almost touch the vault, and I was forced to stay over this headboard, in the arms of a priest, in order to keep it still and to look at the poor ill one. While in this position, I saw a few religious surrounding and offering their cares to the patient, and saying among themselves with intense bitterness, "She is ill. She is ill. It would take nothing more than a little shake." And I was taking care of keeping the headboard of the bed still, for fear that if the bed moved, she might die. But seeing that things were dragging on and almost getting annoyed by that idleness, I said to the one who was holding me, "For pity's sake, let me get down. I am doing nothing good, nor am I helping anyone. Why stay here, so useless? If I get down, at least I can serve her, help her." And he, "Did you not hear that even a little shake could make her get worse and cause most sad things to happen to her? If you get down, since there is no one to keep the bed still, she may even die." And I, "But how can it be possible that by just doing this good can come to her? I don't believe it. For pity's sake, let me get down." So, after I repeated these words several times, he put me down on the floor, and by myself, with no one holding me, I drew near the ill one, and to my surprise and sorrow, I saw that the bed was moving. At those movements, her face went blue. She trembled and emitted a death rattle. Those few religious were crying and saying, "There is no more time. She is in the extreme moments now." Then some enemies entered, soldiers and captains, to beat the ill one, but dying as she was, that lady got up with intrepidness and majesty to be wounded and beaten. On seeing this, I trembled like a reed, and I said to myself, "I have been the cause of this. I myself have given the push for so much evil to happen." And I understood that that lady represented the Church, infirm in her members, with many other meanings which it seems useless to me to explain, because they can be comprehended by reading what I have written. Then I found myself inside myself, and Jesus told me in my interior, "If I suspend you forever, the enemies will begin to make my church shed blood." And I, "Lord, it is not that I do not want to stay. Heavens forbid that I move away from your will even for the blink of an eye. Only if you want me to, I will stay. If you don't want me to, I will get out." And he, "My daughter, as soon as the confessor released you by telling you, 'All right, tomorrow you will try,' the bond of victim was also released, because only the freeze of obedience is what constitutes the victim, and I would never accept her as such without this freeze, even at the cost of making a miracle of my omnipotence, if necessary, to give light to the one who directs you, so that he would give this obedience. I suffered, and suffered voluntarily, but what constituted me as victim was the obedience to my dear Father, who wanted to adorn all of my works, from the greatest to the littlest, with the honorary freeze of obedience. Then, finding myself inside myself, I felt a fear to try to go out. But then I snapped out of it, saying, "The one who gave me this obedience should have thought about this. And besides, if the Lord wants me, I am ready." October 24th, 1905, Volume 6. The miseries of the human nature serve to reorder in it the order of all virtues. While considering my misery, the weakness of human nature, I felt I was an object so very abominable to myself, and I imagined how much more abominable I am before God. And I said to myself, Lord, how ugly the human nature has become. Now, coming for just a little, he told me, "Nothing has come out of my hands which is not good. On the contrary, I created the human nature beautiful and striking. And if the soul sees it as muddy, rotten, weak, abominable, this serves the human nature like manure serves the earth. One who does not understand what it is all about would say, 'This one is crazy, for he smears the earth with this filth,' while one who understands knows that this filth serves to fecundate the earth, to make the plants grow, and to render the fruits more beautiful and tasty. So I created the human nature with these miseries, to reorder in it the order of all virtues. Otherwise it would remain without the exercise of true virtues." Then I saw in my mind the human nature as though full of holes, and in these holes there was rot, mud, and from within them branches loaded with flowers and fruits were coming out. So I comprehended that everything is in the use we make, even of miseries themselves. October 24th, 1910, Volume 9, Disturbance and its Effects. Everything comes from the fingers of God. I was highly afflicted because of the privation of my lovable Jesus, and having received communion, I was lamenting because of his absence. And Jesus told me in my interior, "My daughter, sad things, very sad things are happening and will happen." I was frightened. So various days went by without Jesus. I just heard him repeat often, "My good daughter, patience with my not coming. Later I will tell you why." So I went on embittered, yes, but peaceful, when all of a sudden I had a dream that saddened me very much and also disturbed me. More so, since not seeing Jesus, I had no one to whom to turn in order to be surrounded by that aura of peace that only Jesus possesses. Oh, how a disturbed soul is to be pitied. Disturbance is an infernal air that one breathes, and this air of hell casts out the celestial air of peace, and takes the place of God in the soul. Fuming with this infernal air in the soul, disturbance masters her so much that with its infernal blow it makes even the holiest and the purest things appear as the ugliest and most dangerous. It puts everything in disorder, and the soul, tired of this disorder, is soaked with the stink of this air of hell. She is annoyed by everything, and feels boredom for God himself. I did feel this air of hell not inside of me, but around me. Yet it did so much harm to me that I no longer cared that Jesus was not coming. Even more, it seemed to me that I didn't even want him. It is true that the thing was very serious, not a bagatelle. It was that I had been assured that I was not in a good state. Therefore the sufferings, the visits of Jesus, were not will of God, and I was supposed to stop it once and for all. I am not saying everything about it, because I don't think it is necessary. I wrote this only to obey. Then the following night I saw water pouring down from heaven like a deluge, such as to cause great damage and bury entire towns, and the impression from that dream was such that I didn't want to see anything. In the meantime, a dove, hovering around me, told me, "The moving of the leaves, of the plants, the murmuring of the waters, the light that invades the earth, the motion of all nature, everything comes from the fingers of God. Imagine if your state alone should not come from the fingers of God." So when the confessor came, I told him everything about my state, and he told me that it had been the devil in order to disturb me. I remained a little bit more peaceful, but like someone who has suffered a grave illness. October 24th, 1918, Volume 12. The soul must invest herself with Jesus to be able to receive him in the sacrament. I was preparing myself to receive my sweet Jesus in the sacrament, and I prayed that he himself would cover my great misery. And Jesus told me, "My daughter, in order to allow the creature to have all the necessary means to receive me, I wanted to institute this sacrament on the last day of my life, so as to line up my whole life around each host, as preparation for each creature who would receive me. The creature could never have received me if she had not had a preparing God, who was taken only by excess of love for wanting to give himself to the creature. And since the creature was unable to receive me, that same excess of love led me to give my whole life in order to prepare her. So it placed my steps, my works, my love before her own. And since within me there was also my passion, it placed also my pains in order to prepare her. So invest yourself with me, cover yourself with each one of my acts, and come." Afterwards I lamented to Jesus because he no longer makes me suffer as he used to. And he added, "My daughter, I look not so much at the suffering, but at the good will of the soul, at the love with which she suffers. Because of it, the tiniest suffering becomes great. Trifles take life within the awe and acquire value, and the lack of suffering is even greater than suffering itself. What a sweet violence it is for me to see a creature who wants to suffer for love of me. What do I care if she does not suffer, when I see that not suffering is for her a more transfixing nail than suffering itself? On the other hand, lack of goodwill, things which are forced and without love, as great as they may be, remain small. I do not look at them. On the contrary, they are a weight for me." October 24th, 1922, Volume 14. One who lives in the divine will places it in current between heaven and earth, and receives the deposit of its goods. My always lovable Jesus continues to speak to me about his most holy will. He seems to me like a true teacher who, while it appears that he has nothing else to teach to his disciple, in reality he is just taking some rest, to be able to enter the field again and give more sublime lessons, such as to capture the attention of the boy and win his love and veneration. So on coming he told me, "My daughter, how many prodigies does my supreme volition operating in the creature contain? As the soul lets this holy will enter into her, and herself into it, and allows it to operate in everything, even in the most tiny things, a current is established between the will operating within the divine persons and their own will operating in the creature. Therefore, if they love, or want to give love, they find a place in which to put this love, because in one point of the earth there is their own will operating in the creature which can receive this love. And rising up into the womb of the divinity, this will of theirs, which is as though divided in two, in the creature and in the divinity, while it is always one, will bring them the return of their love in a divine manner on the part of the creature. And so the eternal love places itself in current between heaven and earth, descending and ascending with no obstruction, because there is one who can receive its deposit. Their own will operating in the creature will be jealous in holding it in safekeeping. In the same way, if my divinity wants to release its beauty, its truths, its power, its infinite graces. It has a place in which to deposit them. Its own will operating in the creature. The current is open. My will maintain the pace in jealousy, keeping my beauty, my truths, my power, and in giving me thanks for my infinite graces. So I will no longer be defrauded in anything. I will be in perfect harmony between my will operating in the creature and that of heaven. How many of my things will I make known more? My suffocated love will be free when I form my deposit, and the currents between heaven and earth will always be open. October 24th, 1925, Volume 18. The divine will is one single act, immense and eternal, which contains altogether creation, redemption, and sanctification. One who lives in the divine will possesses this single act and takes part in all its works, forming one single act with her God. As I was in my usual state, I felt my sweet Jesus move in my interior, in the act of laying himself within me, as if he were placing himself in agony. I could hear his rattle of agony, and I too felt I was agonizing together with him. Then, after I had suffered for a little while together with Jesus, he said to me, "My daughter, thinking about my passion, compassionating me in my pains, is very pleasing to me. I feel I am not alone in my pains, but I have with me the company of the creature, because of whom I suffer, and whom I love so much. And as I have her with me, my suffering becomes sweeter for me. How hard is isolation and suffering! When I see myself alone, I have no one to whom to entrust my pains, nor anyone to whom to give the fruit which my pains contain. And so I remain as though drowned with pains and love. Therefore, as my love can endure no more, I come to you, to suffer within you, and you with me the pains of my passion, in act, in order to repeat what I did and suffered in my humanity. To repeat my passion in act in the creature is different from one who only thinks about and compassionates my pains. The first is an act of my life, which takes my place in order to repeat my pains, and I feel I am given back the effects and the value of a divine life. On the other hand, when one thinks about my pains and compassionates me, it is the mere company of the creature that I feel. But do you know in whom I can repeat the pains of my passion and act? In one who has my will as center of life. My will alone is one single act which has no succession of acts. This single act is as though fixed to one point which never moves, and this point is eternity. And while being one single act, prime act, endless act, its circumference is so immense that nothing can escape it. It embraces everything and everyone with one single embrace, because everything starts from that prime act, has one single act. So the creation, the redemption, and the sanctification are one single act for the divinity, and only because it is one single act, it has the power to make all acts its own, as if they were one alone. Now, one who lives in my will possesses this single act, and it is no wonder that she takes part in the pains of my passion, as though in act. In this single act she finds, as though in act, her Creator creating the creation, and forming one single act with her God, she creates together with him, flowing as one single act in all created things, and forming the glory of creation for her Creator. Her love shines over all created things. She enjoys and takes pleasure in them. She loves them as things belonging to herself and to her God. In that single act, she has a note that echoes the whole of the divine operating. And in her emphasis of love, she says, "What is yours is mine, and what is mine is yours. Be glory, honor, and love to my Creator." In this single act, she finds the redemption in act. She makes it all her own. She suffers my pains as if they were her own. She flows within everything I did, in my prayers, in my pains, in my words, in everything. She has a note of reparation, of compassion, of love, and of substitution for my life. In this single act, she finds everything. She makes everything her own, and places her requital of love everywhere. This is why the living in my will is the prodigy of prodigies. It is the enchantment of God and of all heaven, as they see the littleness of the creature flow in all the things of their Creator. Like solar ray bound to this single act, she diffuses everywhere, and in everyone. Therefore I recommend to you, even at the cost of your life, never go out of this single act of my will, that I may repeat in you, as though in act, the creation, the redemption, and the sanctification. See, also nature contains the similes of this single act. In the atmosphere, the sun has one single act. From the moment it was created by God, it always does one single act. Its light, its heat are so transfused together as to become inseparable from each other, and from up high, it remains always in the act of sending light and heat. And while from up high it knows how to do but one single act, the circumference of its light which descends down below is so great as to embrace all the earth, and with its embrace it produces innumerable effects, constituting itself life and glory of all created things. By virtue of this single act, it has the virtue of enclosing each plant within itself, and to some it administers development, to some maturation of fruits, to some sweetness, to some fragrance. It can be said that the whole earth begs life from the sun, and that each plant, even the littlest blade of grass, from the sun, beseeches its growth and each fruit it must produce. But the sun never changes its action. It glories in doing always one single act. The human nature also contains the simile of one single act, and this is contained in the beating of the heart. Human life begins with the heartbeat. The heartbeat does always one single act. It can do nothing but beating. However, the virtue of this heartbeat, its effects in the human life, are innumerable. As it palpitates, and at each heartbeat, it makes the blood circulate in the members, up to the outermost parts. And as it palpitates, it gives strength to the feet in order to walk, to the hands in order to work, to the mouth in order to speak, to the mind in order to think. It administers warmth and strength to the whole person. Everything depends on the heartbeat, so much so that if the heartbeat is a little labored, one loses energy and the will to operate. The intelligence becomes dim. One is full of pains, a general ill-being. And if the heartbeat ceases, life ceases. The power of a single act repeated continuously is great, much more so for the single act of an eternal God, who has the virtue of doing everything with one single act. Therefore neither past, nor present, nor future exist in this act, and one who lives in my will already finds herself in this single act. And just as the heart does always a heartbeat in the human nature, which constitutes itself life of it, so does my will palpitate continuously in the depth of the soul, but with one single heartbeat. And as it palpitates, it gives her beauty, sanctity, strength, love, goodness, wisdom. This heartbeat encloses heaven and earth. It is like blood circulation. Like circumference of light, it can be found in the highest points and in the outermost parts. Wherever this single act, this heartbeat of the soul, has full vigor and reigns completely, there is a continuous prodigy, the prodigy which only a God can do. And therefore new heavens, new abysses of graces, surprising truths are discovered in her. But if one asks, where does so much good come from? She would answer, united with the sun, together with the human heartbeat, and with the single act of the eternal God, I do only one thing. I do always the will of God, and I live in it. This is all my secret, and all my fortune. Having said this, he disappeared. But later I found myself outside of myself, with little baby Jesus in my arms. He was very pale. He was shivering all over. His lips were blue, and he was cold and so emaciated as to arouse pity. It seemed to me that he had taken refuge in my arms in order to be defended. I pressed him to my heart to warm him. I took his little hands and feet in my hands, and I squeezed them so that he would not shiver. I kissed him and I kissed him over and over again. I told him that I loved him very, very much. And while I was doing this, the little baby regained color. He stopped shivering. He was all restored, and he clung more tightly to me. But while I thought that he would remain always with me, to my surprise, I saw that, very gently, he was going down from my knees. I cried out, pulling him by one arm, "Jesus, where are you going? How can this be? You leave me?" And he, "I must go." And I, "And when are you coming back?" And Jesus, "In 3 years from now." And he took his way to leave. But who can say my sorrow? I repeated to myself among tears and convulsions, "I will see him again in 3 years from now. Oh God, how shall I go on?" And the pain was so great that I fainted and could not understand anything any more. But while I was languishing, faint, I just barely opened my eyes, and I saw that he had turned back and was coming up from my other knee. And very gently he crouched down on my lap, and he caressed me with his little hands. He kissed me and repeated to me, calm yourself, for I do not leave you." And as he would say, "I do not leave you," I would feel myself come round and life given back to me. And I found myself inside myself, but with such fear that I felt myself dying. October 24th, 1926, Volume 20. How there is nothing more holy and bearer of every happiness than the divine will. How all the acts of creation and redemption have the purpose of establishing the kingdom of the supreme Fiat. I was doing my usual round in the divine volition, and in each thing I placed my I love you, and I asked that the kingdom of the Fiat come and be known upon earth. And reaching all the acts that my sweet Jesus did in redemption, asking in each act, your kingdom come, I thought to myself, before, in going around so much, both in all creation and in redemption, I used to place only my I love you, my adoration, my thank you. And now, why can I not do without asking for the kingdom of the Fiat? I feel I would want to overwhelm everything, the smallest and the greatest thing, heaven and earth, the very acts of Jesus and Jesus himself, and force them so that everything and everyone may say together with me, we want the kingdom of the supreme Fiat. We want it reigning and dominating in our midst. More so, since all want it, the very acts of Jesus, his life, his tears, his blood, his wounds say from within, may our kingdom come upon earth. And so I enter into the act of Jesus, and I repeat along with it, may the kingdom of the divine Fiat come soon. Now, while I was thinking of this, my beloved Jesus came out from within my interior, and with unspeakable tenderness told me, my daughter, one who is born in my will feels its flowing within her, and as though naturally, she wants for everyone what she possesses. And since my will is immense and encloses everything and everyone, one who possesses it goes around through all the things it encloses, to pray it and win it, to descend upon earth to form its kingdom. However, you must know that in order to have dominion and make them say what you want in all the things that came out of my will and enclose it, first you had to know them and then love them, so that love might give you the right to possess them and to make them do and say whatever you want. Here is the reason why. Before, in going around through all of my works, you would impress your I love you, I adore you, I thank you. It was the knowledges of my works that you were acquiring, and the possession of them that you were taking. Now, after the possession, what greater, holier, and more beautiful thing, more bearer of all happinesses to the human generations, can you ask in the midst of my works, and together with them, than the coming of the kingdom of my will? More so since, in creation, just as in the kingdom of redemption, it was the kingdom of the Fiat that I wanted to establish in the midst of creatures. All of my acts, my very life, their origin, their substance, deep within them, it was the Fiat that they asked for, and for the Fiat were they made. If you could see inside each one of my tears, each drop of my blood, each pain, and all of my works, you would find within them the Fiat that they were asking for, and how they were directed toward the kingdom of my will. And even though, apparently, they seemed to be directed to redeeming and saving man, that was the way that they were making in order to reach to the kingdom of my will. This happens also to creatures when they decide that they want to take possession of a kingdom, of a house, of a land. They do not just find themselves in it and in possession of it immediately, in one instant, but they have to make their way. Who knows how much suffering, fighting, and climbing of stairs in order for them to be in it, and then take possession of it. My daughter, if all the acts and pains that my humanity suffered did not have the restoration of the kingdom of my Fiat upon earth as their origin, substance, and life, I would have moved away from and lost the purpose of creation, which cannot be, because once God has set himself a purpose, he must and can obtain the intent. And if in everything you do, suffer, and say, you do not ask for my Fiat, and do not have my will as origin and substance, you move away from and do not fulfill your mission. And it is necessary that you go around time and time again in my will, in the midst of my works, to ask all in chorus for the coming of the supreme Fiat, so that together with all creation, and with all my works that I did in redemption, you may be filled to the brim with all the acts that are needed before the Celestial Father to make known and to impetrate the kingdom of my will upon earth. Now you must know that all creation and all my works done in redemption are as though tired of waiting, and find themselves in the condition of a noble and rich family, whose children are all of proper stature, good-looking, of uncommon intelligence, always well-dressed and with marvelous neatness. They are the ones who make always the best impression among all others. Now, after such great fortune, this family has had a misfortune. One of these children, degrading himself, descends from his nobility and goes around always dirty. He does unworthy and vile acts that dishonor the nobility of the family, and as much as they do so that he may appear together with the other brothers, they do not succeed. On the contrary, he keeps getting worse and worse, to the point of becoming the mockery and the laughingstock of all. The whole family has a constant sorrow, and as much as they feel the dishonor of this son, they cannot destroy him and say that he does not belong to them, and that he did not come from that same Father to whom they belong. Such is the condition in which all creation and all the works of my redemption find themselves. They are all a celestial family. Their origin is divine nobility. All of them have the will of their celestial Father as their insignia, dominion, and life, and therefore they all maintain themselves in their nobility, beautiful, decorous, pure, of enchanting beauty, and worthy of that will that possesses them. After so much glory and honor for this celestial family, they have had the misfortune that one alone, man, who came from their same Father, has degraded himself, and in the midst of such great glory and beauty of theirs, he is always dirty. He does foolish actions, unworthy and vile. They cannot deny that he belongs to them, but they do not want him in their midst so dirty and foolish. Therefore, as though tired, they all pray that the kingdom of my will may come into the midst of creatures, so that one may be the nobility, the honor, and the glory of this family. And in seeing that the little daughter of my will comes into their midst, and animating them, asks and makes everyone ask for the coming of the kingdom of the supreme Fiat into the midst of creatures, they all feel delighted, because their sorrow is close to ending. October 24th, 1929, Volume 27. How in the divine will the soul has everything in her power, because she finds the font of the divine works, and can repeat them whenever she wants. I was feeling all abandoned in the divine Fiat, following and offering all of its acts, both of creation and of redemption. And as I reached the conception of the word, I said to myself, how I would like, in the divine will, to make the conception of the word my own, to be able to offer to the Supreme Being the love, the glory, the satisfaction, as if the word were being conceived once again. But while I was saying this, sweet Jesus moved in my interior and told me, my daughter, in my divine will the soul has everything in her power. There is nothing that our divinity has done, both in creation and in redemption, whose font our divine Fiat does not possess. In fact, it disperses nothing of our acts, but rather it is the depository of everything. And one who possesses our divine volition possesses the font of my conception, of my birth, of my tears, of my steps, of my works, of everything. Our acts are never exhausted, and as she remembers and wants to offer my conception is renewed as if I were being conceived again. I rise again to new birth. My tears, my pains, my steps and works rise again to new life and repeat the great good that I did in redemption. So one who lives in our divine will is the repeater of our works, because just as nothing in the creation has been dispersed of what was created, so is everything of redemption an act of arising continuously. But who gives us the spur? Who gives us the occasion to move our fonts in order to renew our works? One who lives in our will. By virtue of it, the creature takes part in our creative strength. Therefore she can make everything rise again to new life. With her acts, with her offerings, with her supplications, she moves our fonts continuously, that, moved as though by a pleasant breeze, form the waves, and overflowing with our acts, multiply and grow to infinity. Our fonts are symbolized by the sea. If the wind does not agitate it, if the waves are not formed, the waters do not overflow outside, and the cities do not get wet. The same with our fonts of our so many works. If our divine fiat does not want to move them, or if one who lives in it gives no thought to forming any breeze with her acts, even though they are filled to the brim, they do not overflow outside to multiply their goods for the good of creatures. In addition to this, with one who lives in our divine fiat, as she keeps forming her acts, these acts ascend to the beginning from which the creature came out. They do not remain down below, but ascend so very high to look for the bosom of him from whom the first act of her existence came out. These acts line up around the beginning, that is God, has divine acts. In seeing the acts of the creature in his divine will, God recognizes them as his acts, and feels loved and glorified as he wants, with his very love and with his own glory. End of October 24th. Fiat.